I'm ashamed to admit, there's a part of me that quietly, deeply understood why it had to happen. That understanding, a cold, hard knot in my stomach, only solidified when I saw the proof laid bare. And the deepest shame? Knowing I would have done exactly the same, given the impossible choice. The way I got it, she was Dr. Aris Thorne, late 40s, early 50s maybe, a kind of quiet intensity that could make you uncomfortable if you weren't used to it. She'd dedicated her life, like, all of it, to the Kallai Marsupial Mouse. You probably haven't heard of them. Most people haven't. They were these tiny, rust-colored things, nocturnal, desert dwellers, barely bigger than a thumb. They had these huge, almost sapphire blue eyes that were supposed to be adapted for seeing in moonlight. That's what the original record said, anyway. She knew them. She breathed them. Her work was all about the last few pockets. The last habitat, these ancient, twisted rock formations that jutted up like forgotten teeth in the middle of a vast, bleached landscape. She'd set up camp there, year after year, in a temporary field station that was more glorified tent than building. But the real work, the deep dives, happened back at the main facility, a low-slung, unassuming concrete block baking under the desert sun, designed to keep the heat out and the precious cool in. Inside, it was always the same, the quiet hum of equipment, the faint scent of antiseptics, and the specific smell of very old paper. Records. So many records. She had this one desk, they said, always meticulously organized. A single, vivid coral orange lamp cast a focused pool of light on her notes, even in the middle of the day. And she was always there, sifting through the latest telemetry data, the genetic sequences, the behavioral observations. It was a routine, almost a meditation. She charted every twitch, every faint chirp, every subtle shift in the Kallai's dwindling numbers. The problem, or the thing that started gnawing at her, was the survival rate. For a species on the brink, the last few individuals in her protected zones were doing too well. They were adapting, in ways that didn't quite fit the existing scientific models of the original area's seizure. They were eating slightly different seeds, showing a remarkable, almost stubborn resilience to environmental shifts that should have decimated them faster. The older data, from the 50s and 60s, spoke of extreme fragility, specific dietary needs, a sensitivity to even minor temperature fluctuations. These Kallai, the last ones, were tougher. Hardier. It was a good thing, a miracle even, but it kept her up. She'd stare at the data, the familiar graphs, and it felt like she was looking at a distorted reflection. Actually, wait. That's not quite right. She didn't just stare at the data. She went out. Into the biting cold of the desert night. They said she could track them by instinct, by the faintest rustle in the scrub. She'd spend hours, days even, just observing, trying to reconcile what she saw with what the old papers promised. She knew the original descriptions by heart. The exact length of the tail tuft, the specific pattern of fur mottling, the high-frequency vocalizations. And the ones she watched, they were close. But not identical. There was always something. A slightly broader paw. A fractionally different skull shape. A vocalization that was lower, more guttural, than the archival recordings. Tiny things. Things you could dismiss, if you wanted to. And she did, for a long time. Dismiss them, I mean. Because what was the alternative? To admit that the thing she was fighting for, the original thing, might already be gone. No, that's not quite fair to her. She wasn't dismissing it out of denial, not exactly. She was being thorough. Her flaw, someone once told me, was that she mistook thoroughness for action. She kept researching when the research was already complete. The research was just telling her something she didn't want to hear. The real mistake here is thinking that data always provides clarity. Sometimes, it just gives you more questions, sharper ones that cut deeper. She had all these samples, stored in sapphire blue cryogenic containers, pristine and labeled. Historical specimens, genetic material from museum pieces, going back a century. And the newest ones, from her living population. When she finally ran the comprehensive comparative analysis, it wasn't a sudden shock. It was more like watching a picture slowly come into focus, revealing something you vaguely recognized but never expected. The Kallai she was saving, the ones with the sapphire eyes, they weren't the Aris Thorne. Not purely. Not anymore. They were, in fact, a subspecies, a hybrid, a subtly adapted variant. Somewhere in the accelerating decline, a hardier cousin, or maybe just a significantly changed version of the original, had taken over. The original, the true Aris Thorne as described in the old books, was gone. Functionally extinct. The ones she had were Kallai Aris novice, a new Kallai, a resilient, unexpected offshoot that had found a way to persist in a world that had tried to eliminate them. They had a slightly broader diet, a better ability to regulate temperature, a different reproductive cycle. They were survivors. But they weren't the survivors. She stared at the genomic map projected onto the wall, a swirling constellation of vivid sapphire and coral orange markers, showing the undeniable divergence. It was so clear. She'd seen it in the field, in the subtle behaviors, in the physical anomalies. But seeing it codified, irrefutable, on a screen, that was different. It confirmed everything. It also felt like it confirmed nothing. What strikes me at this point is how much of our lives are spent in this slow, dawning recognition. We collect the evidence, piece by piece, sometimes over decades, for a truth we've already felt in our gut. And then, when the final, undeniable piece clicks into place, it's not a sudden revelation. It's an echo. An echo of a quiet dread you've been living with, a hum under the surface of every action. Maybe you felt this too. That moment when you realize you've been moving towards a cliff for years, and the final step isn't a fall, but just the sudden, chilling awareness that there's no more ground beneath your feet. It's the silence of that realization, not the crash. She had known something was wrong longer than she had admitted. Maybe not consciously, not with data points and genetic markers, but in the way the silence of the desert nights felt different when she was alone. The way the calls of the Kallai, which she'd once found comforting, began to sound foreign. She'd always found solace in the meticulous, the scientific. The cold, hard facts. And now, the cold, hard facts were telling her something that rendered her entire life's work, the stated purpose of it, obsolete. She had dedicated her life to saving something that had already vanished. There was this old man, they called him Ren. He was from the local indigenous community, one of the last who still spent his time out in those specific rock formations. He wasn't a scientist, not in any formal sense. But he knew the land. Knew the animals. He'd seen the Kallai change over generations, had a different name for them, a name that recognized their subtle shifts, their adaptability. He'd seen their color lighten, their movements become bolder, their calls deepen, long before Aris had even started her PhD. He used to visit her field station sometimes, not often, but enough. He'd bring her dried berries, or offer cryptic observations about the weather. One time, she was showing him a new tracking device, a tiny thing she could attach to the Kallai's leg, shining faintly under the coral orange light of her headlamp. He picked it up, turned it over in his calloused hand, then looked at her with those ancient eyes. "You count," he said, his voice raspy like dry leaves. "You count the beats, the breaths. But the song, it changes. Always changes. Sometimes, you don't recognize it, but it is still song." She had dismissed it then, of course. Poetic, but unscientific. She was looking for preservation, not change. But now, his words echoed. The song had changed. And she hadn't recognized it, not until the data forced her to. The next few weeks, Aris worked in a kind of focused trance. She wasn't eating much, not really sleeping. Her eyes, people noticed, had started to take on that familiar sapphire blue intensity of the Kallai themselves, wide and unblinking. She reran every test, cross-referenced every paper, looking for any flaw in her methodology, any escape hatch from this truth. But there was none. The conclusion was robust. The area's seizure was gone. The area's novice was here. She had to present this, of course. To the foundation that funded her, to the National Conservation Board. To the world. And she knew what that meant. It meant explaining that the millions of dollars, the decades of effort, the public awareness campaigns focused on saving the fragile Kallai, had been, in a way, a misdirection. Not a lie, no. But a profound misunderstanding of what they were actually saving. It would mean the immediate withdrawal of funds, the reclassification of the species, probably the dismantling of her entire project. Because who funds the saving of a species that, according to their own narrative, has already gone extinct? Who funds an adaptation when the goal was preservation? This is exactly where everything changes, you see. It's not just about the science anymore. It's about narratives. About what people want to believe they're doing, versus what they actually are doing. And changing that narrative, especially when it's a story of valiant effort and desperate hope, is harder than saving any animal. She called a meeting, a small one, with her two closest colleagues and the project director. They met in the main office, a sterile room with cold, fluorescent light. She'd prepared the slides, the graphs, the genetic markers. She spoke calmly, professionally, using the language of science to say things that could not be said professionally. She laid out the evidence, piece by painstaking piece, the divergence, the resilience, the novice. The project director, a man named Dr. Chen, sat across from her. He was a good man, dedicated, but also a pragmatist, bound by budgets and public perception. His face, usually open, slowly closed as she spoke. He kept rubbing the bridge of his nose, his eyes fixed on the table. When she finished, the room was silent. A silence so heavy, you could almost hear the dust motes dancing in the cold light. So, Chen said finally, his voice carefully flat. What you're telling us, Aris, is that the Kallai Marsupial Mouse, the one we've been telling everyone we're saving, is gone. The area's seizure, Aris corrected, her voice barely a whisper, yes. It is, by all definitions, functionally extinct. The population we have, the ones thriving in the protected zones, are a distinct, though closely related, lineage. They are remarkable. Resilient. They are living proof of adaptation. But they're not it, one of her colleagues, a younger woman named Chloe, interjected. Her face was pale, as if she'd just been told someone she loved had died. They're not the original. All our grants, all our public campaigns, they're for the original. Aris looked at them, those sapphire eyes unwavering. They are living beings. They have a right to exist. They are the inheritors of that lineage, even if they have changed. Chen sighed, a long, weary sound. He picked up a coral orange pen from the table, turning it over and over. Aris, if we put this out there, if we declare area's seizure extinct, the funding dries up. The public support evaporates. We'll lose everything. The facilities, the protected land, the staff. Everything we've built, even for these novice, it will be gone. He looked at her then, a plea in his eyes. Can we just call them Kallai? Can we just continue the work, for them? Without this distinction? She didn't answer immediately. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken consequences. It was a choice between truth and practical salvation. A choice between integrity and the survival of any Kallai. It wasn't clean. Nothing ever is. It was a choice that felt like cutting off a part of yourself, no matter which way you went. I still don't know if I made the right choice, the narrator says, and then catches herself. No, Aris. I heard Aris say she still didn't know. Not truly. Not in her heart. The project continued. They kept saving the Kallai. The funding didn't dry up, at least not immediately. The public campaigns continued to show images of those sapphire-eyed creatures, struggling against the odds. Aris kept working, meticulously, relentlessly. She continued to study the area's novice, their subtle adaptations, their fierce will to live. She even found a strange kind of pride in their resilience. They weren't what she set out to save, but they were something. And they were beautiful. But something had shifted inside her. The quiet, persistent burden of holding a difficult, undeniable truth. The exhaustion of being right about something no one with power would act on. She walked the same desert paths, checked the same traps, analyzed the same data, but the meaning had changed. The original purpose, the preservation of the area's seizure, was now a ghost that haunted her work. She had saved the individuals she could save, and the save was insufficient for the species. And it was still worth doing. That was the irony. That was the central, aching truth. She never spoke of the novice again outside that room. Not professionally, anyway. Only once, they say, she found old man Wren sitting on a sun-bleached rock near the field station. He was watching a dust devil dance across the flats, kicking up coral orange clouds that caught the late afternoon sun. He didn't look at her when she approached. The song, he said, without preamble, it is a new song. Louder, perhaps. But still a song. She just nodded. She sat beside him, feeling the warmth of the rock beneath her. The desert air was cool now, carrying the faint, dry scent of sage. The sky above them was a deep, darkening sapphire, already showing the first pinpricks of stars. She listened to the silence, to the whisper of the wind, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't try to decipher it. She just listened. The last I heard, Aris is still there, still working. Still charting the movements of the Kallai, still protecting their dwindling territory. The records are all updated, meticulously, though no one outside that small circle knows the true significance of the genetic codes. The world believes they are saving the area's seizure. And the Kallai, the area's novice, they continue to survive, oblivious to the burden of their own truth. I don't know. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? About all the things we believe we're protecting, all the stories we tell ourselves, while the actual thing, the real thing, might have already subtly shifted, changed into something else entirely, something we no longer fully recognize. What does it mean to keep going, to fight for something, when the true object of your fight has already transformed beyond your original understanding? And what do you do with that truth, once you hold it, heavy and cold, in your own hands? The last thing she kept on that meticulously organized desk, under the vivid coral orange light, wasn't a genetic chart or a telemetry map. It was a single, smooth, sapphire blue desert stone. Just a stone. She'd found it years ago, near where the last, pure, Kallai had supposedly been sighted. It wasn't special, not really. Just another piece of the desert. But it was there. And she would trace its cool surface with her thumb sometimes, lost in thought. After Aris discovered the Kallai were a new species entirely, would you have had the strength to keep that truth secret, just to continue protecting them? If you find yourself captivated by stories of quiet resilience, hidden truths, and the profound ironies of life, then you belong right here with us. Do you know someone who's quietly battling for a cause that's subtly shifted under their feet, or carrying a difficult truth alone? This story might just speak to their experience. If you were faced with a truth as heavy as Aris's, that the very thing you protected had subtly transformed, would you keep fighting for the memory, or adapt to its new form? Tell me in the comments, I want to know. If this story made you ponder the subtle shifts in things you hold dear, like the Kallai, then hit that like button to share the thought. If you're someone who finds meaning in the quiet mysteries, who ponders the unseen transformations like the area's novice, then this channel is where you belong.